Hey guys, I want to show you a sequence that will be very useful for most of you. So I imported a list on Persona of Contact Out founders. So Contact Out as the data provider. And Contact Out, what's cool about them is that they filter these founders as in their popularity, right? So like all the top ones you will know. Simon Sinek, Sofia Moroso, they have a book, Ryan Serrant in sales. This guy's a LinkedIn influencer that I had on my podcast. So all of these folks, they're top people, they're popular people. And why I'm saying this is that in this campaign, we're going to mention to them what podcast they've been on. And if you're not super popular nowadays, you won't be invited to podcasts, which is why I had to find popular people, because I deployed an agent, a GPT, with this prompt to do a quick search about these people and find out which podcast they've been on, right? If they're not popular, they won't pop on Google. And that's what the agent does. It go scours the internet, right? A persona agent, that is. So long story short, if you can see the cold email that I'm going to send him here, it's a warm intro, right? It's warmer than 95% of stuff out there because we're mentioning that we saw them on a podcast. Saw your podcast on Built to Sell Radio discussing strategy for successfully selling companies. That's quite good. And then the title is also AI built. So the AI had to take the podcast title and put it in the subject line here. So we're cold emailing them, and the call to action is to for them to come on my podcast. So I believe that's super powerful. How did I do that? I was halfway my explanation. So I use Persona, the Persona agent with this prompt. Let me know if you want this prompt here. And yeah, Persona agent, it's an option. So when you go in enrich data, and it's free, right? Which is why I used it. And you write agent, you can find a Persona agent. They have the quantum agent, which is way better, but this one costs credits. So yeah, it's super fantastic what you can do with the Persona quantum agent. Who knows? I'll make a video pretty soon about them. But 2 credits, and they only give you like 1,000 or 2,000. You'll get out of credits pretty soon. So yeah, I prompted it, and that was the result. Yes, Simon Sinek has been on various podcasts, and they dropped a couple, the usual shows, right? There was a detailed answer here that he's also a podcast host. And you can see it got his website, it's script listen notes and player.fm. The confidence score was 90, which is interesting. Filtering like anything that's not over 80, let's say. You can see another example here. So Janine Alice, whoever that is. So that's all the podcasts she's been on. What could be cool would be to scrape all of these podcasts, the YouTube link, I guess, and ask for the AI to get the transcription of these YouTube videos and actually make a book about that. If she's that popular, like Janine Alice's top 7 tips, and deploy it as a Kindle or an ebook. That would be interesting. So that's agent results. It's an agent, right? It's an agent. It's like an employee that would go fetch website information, but it's an AI in that case. So once you develop that agent, once you deploy that agent, I made another prompt just to simplify that full data. It's like, okay, out of all of this data plus like past fed data, return, like I saw your podcast with this guy about XYZ, right? And it's pretty short because, as I've told you guys, you need to be very short in your AI results, AI snippets nowadays, because deliverability issues, right? So the shorter the better, plus human attention span, which is only getting down as well. You want a very short AI snippet as a result. And finally, I asked it to take everything that's in that column and only return the podcast name, right? Because I'm going to use that as the title of my email, which is attention grabbing, right? Because all of these folks, they will ignore an email that says podcast or invitation, but they will open an email that mention a past podcast they've been on. So we get them to open that email with mentioning a past podcast they've been on. This is super smart. Then we proceed with their first name. So that's in Apollo, right? Thomas, Chris, Brett, etc., etc. And we proceed with the AI line. I saw your podcast. Let's pick another just for an example. Saw your podcast with the host on venture capital, blah, blah, blah. That's not super good. Saw your podcast on the Elevate Construction podcast. Saw your podcast on, yeah. So these ones are not super well formulated because there's like podcast 2 times, but okay. Saw your podcast with Buildertrend on construction and entrepreneurship. So that's a good one here. Saw your podcast with on freight shipping industry, focusing on interviews with founders and executives. Okay, the Freight Caviar podcast. Saw your podcast with PH setting the standard, discussing innovation, funding, and entrepreneurship strategy. So PH sending the standard, right? So this is an example of a personalized line, and that intro line will do better than most, right? So you take these emails, you send them at scale, and that will get you a bunch of podcast response. If you're not introduced to why podcasts are so powerful, you can get leads from them, you can get connections, you grow neurons if you interview the right folks. You get sponsors that pay you, and you get AdSense, so YouTube paying you for these. So podcasts are really, really bullish on them. So let me know if you have comments on, by the way, these custom tags, as usual, I go in Apollo. You can just write custom tag or fields. I think they're called right now, fields. Yeah, it's pretty bad search bar, Apollo. Go here in setting and write fields and objects and contacts, and you go in field, and then you add the custom tag that you've been building. Saw your podcast with this, for example, and podcast name you've been with. So these are the 2 that I've used. And because I put them in the custom field, I can now integrate them in Campaign at scale 200 contacts. Guys, let me know if you have questions, if that was helpful. And if you want to share the prompt again, or anything that can be useful, templates or automations, you send me a DM on LinkedIn.